Gold certificates, which we hold them at about a 1974 value, which was, I don't know, $46.
アメリカ政府によるビットコイン戦略的備蓄構想が進行中。ステーブルコイン等市場構造の法整備が最優先課題になっていると、先週のミス議員が発表。バイデン政権からトランプ政権への移行で政策シフトが、継続中。
An ounce or some such thing, and then bring them to market value and then use that to buy Bitcoin. If we did that, we could probably buy.
CBDC、中央銀行デジタル通貨をアメリカはしない宣言、これはでかい。EU は CBDC で管理監視をすると徹底すると言っている一方、アメリカは絶対にしませんということで USDT、ステーブルコインとかの規制の方をやっていくということで、これは大きい。自由の女神、ね、ビットコインはデジタルゴールドとして金と石と並ぶ戦略的資産になるとも言及。ビットコインのホドル戦略が国家戦略レベルで重視されていると。ドイツとは大違いのアメリカ。規制と法整備の明確化で業界のアメリカの、トップ会計を目指すと、世界のスーパー最強のアメリカになるというふうにトランプがデジタルアセットサミットで再宣言。政治家とビットコイン支持者の関係強化が続いていて、ビジネスと政治界が、今まで相反していた、ハゲンズラーとコインベースの社長とか XRP とか、メタマスクの会社とかコンセンサスとか、法廷闘争持ち込まれ150ミリオン XRP が弁護士隊でやった。それと逆の方向に今一緒にフュージョンしようって、ドラゴンボール Z のフュージョン。政治家とビジネスが両方でやってるアメリカ、世界最強。ということで、戦略的人脈について、すでに20万ビットコインを欧州保有していて、これを売りませんと大統領が言っていると。
You're the big boss now. You're in charge. Let's maybe start with stablecoin regulation, which seems to be the first thing that you guys are going to tackle. What is the process that you want to follow? And then what do you think the outcome will end up being?
Well, great to see you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm chairing a new digital asset subcommittee within the Senate Banking Committee. We're starting with stablecoins. We've had a meeting of the subcommittee members just to quietly go through the bill. So often, we don't do that in Congress, which it just seems intuitive that we would do it. But now that we get to lead, the members of my party get to lead, we're doing that. So we met with the members of the subcommittee. We walked everybody through the bill. We talked about the details. We talked about areas where there's room for negotiation and areas that seem to be pretty well fixed and understood. And then we had a hearing, our first hearing just a couple days ago, to talk both about stablecoins and market structure and the importance of both. So when we finally go to markup in the banking committee, we will start with stablecoins. And then we'll move to market structure. Now, I think market structure will take a little bit longer, but I'm not sure yet whether the House will move their bill first. As you know, they passed FIT 21 last year when the Senate could not move a market structure bill. But the Senate and the House are both working their versions of the bill, which are similar enough that we know we're going to be able to dovetail them at the end, or start pulling elements that we agree on together before we even start the hearings on the market structure bill. So those two will come first, stablecoins and market structure.
過去に売却されたビットコインが今のビットコインの価値で言うと数十億ドルぐらいの価値になっちゃって、これ機械損失だったよねっていう話。これドイツもそうだけどね。ということで今後は長期保有の方針に転換すべきという議論が高まってきていて、でドイツの判例があるから、アメリカやっちゃダメでしょって前例があるのにっていう話ね。だから歴史から学ぶってこういうことが大事なのよ。時間軸整理せないやつね。歴史から学べないからダメなの。リーマンショックの後、 ね、にぎにぎしてたらさ、上がってきたじゃんって話と一緒ね。将来的に毎年20万ビットコインを5年間購入で、これ5年間でトータル100万ビットコインをね、購入した後に20年間保有するというビットコインを戦略的に準備金を法案で通すと、シンシア・ルミス上院議員が計画している状態です。ということで、20万ビットコインのね、今のね、押収しただけじゃ足りないの。アメリカは世界最強になるって言ってるの。中国って今同等のね、ビットコインを保有する。これじゃ世界最強にならないから。だから明らかにね、爆買いをしてくると。それを法案で通さないと、大統領任期が終わった後にコロッと変わっちゃまずいからって意味で、G 固めようとしてるんだよね。これ長期的時間軸って言ってるけども、時間軸を制するってこと、アメリカも制しようとしてるんだよ。20年間ね、アメリカの将来の子供たちのために、ね、コロコロ変わんないで、中国なんてコロコロ変わんないから、今15年でしょ？習近平かなんかわかんないけどさ。それに勝つには、向こう20年間保有とかっていう風に法でね、規制しないと、連邦レベルで規制しないとダメだって言ってるから、これはまさにね、俺たちの先を言ってんの。ね。俺たちっていうかさ、ブルガムとかね、時間軸短いブルーピル社畜ぐらいはさ、すぐに上がってすぐに儲けたいって言ってんじゃん。それ時間軸ね、せいぜいないから。ということで、金のね、準備金とかチーズとかと一緒で戦略的準備金としてビットコインが国家レベルで位置づけられるようなことが動いてると。これ、だからゴールデンウィークには来るんじゃないっていうのをね、1月の下旬に言ったけど、これ動いてるんだよって話ね。で次、ステーブルコイン規制の優先化ということで、アメリカ上院のね、デジタル資産省委員会は、ステーブルコイン規制を最初の法整備対象として検討中。なぜね、ビットコイン準備金じゃなくて、ステーブルコインを最初にやってるのかっていうのが、これ次の CBDC と関わってくるんだけども。
What is the position of the critics, right? The people who want to provide friction, the people who don't want to see this stuff get passed. It feels like, specifically with stablecoin regulation, having clarity, having an understanding of the way that the market should work, understanding why these are important. It doesn't seem that controversial, right? The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve and that stuff, like it's easy to see why people would be kind of against it. But stablecoin seems so simple. And so what are you seeing there in terms of the people who are actually opposing some of this work?
Yeah, I agree that stablecoins seem to be sort of the plain vanilla asset, but there are critics. Some of them think that we should just let the regulatory agencies regulate this and not do it statutorily. I strongly disagree because we will see the regulatory agencies whipsaw if they don't have some statutory frameworks to work with. And certainly we saw that in that the Biden administration was not receptive to any digital assets being legislated, and in fact had used regulatory agencies to tamp down on digital assets and try to move them offshore. Now, this president comes in, he wants to onshore digital assets. He wants to be the digital asset president. He wants Bitcoin mining in the US. He wants us to be the leader of this industry in the world. So completely different approaches, and President Trump's regulatory agencies will reflect his goals. We don't want that to whipsaw back once Trump is no longer in office. So we think it's important to have a statutory regulatory structure, both for stablecoins and for market structure. The other thing I hear, and it just amazes me, is that stablecoins are a lot like a central bank digital currency.
まず、市場構造法案もついて進行してるけど、まずね、今までね、銀行とかってのは、ビットコインを保持した場合っていうのは、ビットコインと同じレベルのね、現金をね、キャッシュで置いとかないとダメだよっていうふうに言われてたの。それがなくなったのが、サブ SAB121 かな。だから、今後はビットコインをね、キープするのに、それと同じ同等の資産をね、ヘッジじゃなくて、なんていうんだ、元本としてみたいな、あんじゃん。銀行ローンを借りるときに家を担保にみたいなのと一緒で、ビットコイン関連とかクリプト関連の、金融資産じゃない、金融商品を売るときに、ビットコインを、ね、担保にできなかったわけよ。ビットコインと同じフィアット通貨分を銀行が持ってないと補填できませんみたいなとかいろいろあって、だから資産として認められなかったわけよね。それがなくなった SAB121 かななんか。ってことはビットコインのもできるわけよね。 ってことは銀行にとっても良いこと。かつ、ステーブルコインでまずはね、って話なんだよね。次が CBDC、中央銀行デジタル通貨とステーブルコインの違いということで、ステーブルコインは民間が発行し、監視目的とは異なる。一方で、中国、EU、日本も CBDC をしようとしてない。これはね、カナダもそうなんだけども、干渉でしたいんだよね。あと、ストップできると。つまり、パミッションレスじゃなくて、パミッションが必要になると。で、トラストフルなんだよね。トラストレスではなくて。つまり、完全ディセントライズされているものって誰もね、信用する必要がないのよね。完全に。だから、Google を信用するとかね、Facebook を信用してるわけよ。Instagram を使ってるってことは、YouTube を見てるってことは、Google を信用しないといけないと。トラストがあるわけよね。中央集権型で。だから、Google が赤番しちゃったら、俺たち終わっちゃうわけよね。それがないのが、一つの中央集権のエンティティにトラストが必要ないよねっていうのがトラストレスね。ってことは、ビットコインとか一緒。完全にディセントライズされてるから、誰からもね、赤番されないとか、そういう意味でステーブルコインね。じゃないと CBDC ってのは中央銀行ってある通り中央集権なわけよ。だから EU とかカナダとか政府がダメっつったら、政府のトラストなくなったら、ダメってなったら完全に赤番されちゃう。ペイパルとかで一緒だよね。そっちにはアメリカが行かないって言ってるの。これのね、凄さがわかる。世界で今唯一、アメリカだけで逆行してんの。ね。キャピタルゲイン税、所得税を撤廃しようとしてる。で、ビットコイン準備金にしようとしてる。で、ステーブルコインをやって CBDC をやらないようにしてる。で、こんなにね、俺たち個人をために、自由のために、ね、俺たちの利権のためにね、戦ってくれてる国家って、先進国で今アメリカだけなんだよね。わかる？このやってること。だから、お前らは、すぐにね、ビットコインが上がんねえっつってピーチクパーチクね、文句言ってるやつ多いけども。
And I just don't see it that way. People are worried about stablecoins being used as a means of surveillance, just the way the digital yuan is that's used around the world that China's issued. I don't see them as being that similar. U.S. bank accounts can be used as a means of surveillance. Obviously, Canadian bank accounts were used as a means of surveillance against the Canadian truckers who were protesting the COVID restrictions to which they were held. The people who contributed to the Canadian truckers had their accounts frozen. I think there was something like 85 or 86 accounts that were frozen for people who had just contributed to the Canadian truckers. Banks can, the federal government can do this now. So I don't see that stablecoins provide a means of surveillance that doesn't already exist in the traditional banking system. The CDBCs, I think, are completely unnecessary for the U.S. We don't need a direct-to-retail facing CBDC because of stablecoin coins in large part. And the central banks themselves, when they exchange fiat currencies among them, or use the Bank for International Settlements to settle transactions among the various central banks in the world, they don't need them either. Jay Powell has said repeatedly that they can, in a frictionless manner, transmit money among the world's central banks. So there's literally no purpose for a U.S. CDBC. But I don't think we should fear stable coins.
時間軸長期で見たら、これやってることは一番真っ当なんだよ。本当にマジで。ビットコインローンも作ってくれるだろうし、みたいなね。今までね、SEC のハゲンズラーとかね、あれだから利権があったんで、利害の不一致があったんで、銀行 VS クリプトで、銀行はね、お金がね、クリプトに流れるのが嫌だったから、顧客が盗まれるじゃん。だから SEC ハゲンズラーと、あれで、対抗してバンバンクリプトをね、法廷持ってったんだと思うんだよ。今度トップが変わったから、コロって変わったわけよね。ということで、やっぱりね、既存のね、価値観とか壊すには痛みが伴うんだよね。既存のタクシー協会とかあんじゃん。農業協会とかさ、日本でもあんじゃん。相当なんか農業関係ってさ、日本のさ、政治家とあれとズブズブらしいじゃん。ドネーションとかで。それと一緒なの。道路関係とかも。だから銀行関係もものすごいそれがあったんだと思うよ。正直。で、今は違うってことね。だから今革命の時期ね。 AI とクリプト。だから既存の銀行口座やステーブルコインで十分にデジタル決済が対応可能になるという立場。そして政治的視線と、規制の、変化ということで、トランプ政権ではね、こういうことが起きてるよって今話したよね。で、デジタル資産推進政策が評価されて、大統領令も発動されてるし、人事もね、ハゲンズラ飛んだよね。バイデン政権では抑制的だったハゲンズラ。ね、めちゃめちゃだったわけよ。連邦レベルの法案がなかったから、ああいうことができちゃったのよね。相関しちゃってるの。非相関しちゃってたの。ね。で、インダストリーは、ね、迷ってね、道迷ってオフショアに行っちゃった。それをね、オンショアに戻そうとしてるということで、トランプがビットコインは自由なお金として保有されることで選挙への影響力増し、つまりお金持ってる人が資産家は自由の方に行くから、フロリダ州とかね、テキサス州に行くじゃん。それと一緒、ビットコイン流れてるわけよ。だから規制強すぎて、みんながね、有能な人材から逃げちゃったのと一緒。EU からね、アメリカにとか、日本からさ、有能な人が逃れるのと一緒よ。それを止めるためには、アメリカに、ね、戻すためには、自由をね、メリットにしないといけないってことで、規制緩和をしてるってことね。で、多くの資産は証券でなくてコモディティであるべきという議論が進んでいる中で、ビットコインっていうのはね、コモディティなわけよ。誰特有のものではないのね。トウモロコシとかも石油もね、コモディティなわけよ。特にブランドとかないわけよね。卵とかコモディティ。
Everyone wants to know whether the United States government is going to buy Bitcoin. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, you have been at the forefront of pushing this idea. I think you stood up in Nashville and you literally had a proposed bill. What are the odds? What is the process for us to get there? And ultimately, do you think we will buy Bitcoin?
Well, let me start with the fact that we already own Bitcoin. There is Bitcoin in the U.S. asset forfeiture accounts. We're trying to find out how much Bitcoin and whether they are fully surrendered to U.S. custody. We think that could be the basis for the first year's installment of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We think the United States has held about 200,000 Bitcoin in asset forfeiture. What we don't know is how much of that the Biden administration was selling right before the Trump administration took office. So we have inquiries to the U.S. Marshal Service. I have talked to Pam Bondi about it. We are trying to find that information out now.
On that specifically, Bitcoiners will say, well, just look on the blockchain. Would kind of be the answer. But this is obviously much more complex. Why can't people figure out how many we own?
Yeah, great question. This should be easy to figure out. It should be easy to figure out why a federal agency has 2 times more credit cards issued than there are employees in the agency. I mean, there's so much failure of just simple accounting and business practices in the federal government that it would shock you. It is inexcusable.
So, odds that we get the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve?
My bets are that you'll see a state have a Bitcoin Strategic Reserve before the federal government. States are incubators of innovation. We're seeing the United Arab Emirates purchase Bitcoin. You're going to look at some of the sovereign wealth funds around the world who are not as tied up in a democratic republic like we are, be able to just make it so. The old Captain Picard statement on Star Trek, where he used to just say, make it so. They can do that in the UAE. Of course, we can't do that here. But there's a possibility that some of these things can be begun without statutory authorization. So we'll see what the White House is thinking about that. And then we'll hope to augment it in a way that provides authority by statute for the U.S. government to take gold certificates, which we hold. We hold them at about a 1974 value, which was, I don't know, $46 an ounce or some such thing, and then bring them to market value and then use that to buy Bitcoin. If we did that, we could probably buy 200,000 Bitcoin every year for 5 years, hold them for 20 years, and not use a single new taxpayer dollar to do it. So, this is a very doable thing. What we don't have is enough knowledgeable members of the House and Senate to have the comfort level to do this yet. And so that's where you can come in. Literally talk to your senators and representatives. Help them understand that Bitcoin is digital gold and why. Explain to them the scarcity of Bitcoin, the fact that Bitcoin is completely non-controlled by people, that it is utterly and completely decentralized, that it's infinitely divisible, that it has superior Bitcoin presence, that these are things that can be stored in wallets safely, whether stored for the federal government or by individuals on their own behalf. These are all things that are still questions that are outstanding in a lot of people's minds. So to the extent that sometimes we all, and I'm guilty of this myself, become a little bit of an echo chamber. I'm always talking to advocates, and I'm an advocate of doing this too. I have to spend more time talking to people who either don't understand it and are open-minded, or are opposed but they don't know why. And there are a lot of those in the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. Now, I think that we're going to get a lot more help from this administration in making this an issue that's important to the President and the White House, because the people who are now at Treasury, who are at the regulatory agencies, are both knowledgeable and supportive. So we have a bigger cast of policymakers that are favorably inclined. We have to deploy them, but please deploy yourselves. Make yourselves advocates of a Bitcoin strategic reserve if you feel strongly, like I do, that when it is one of our strategic reserves, just like we have an oil strategic reserve, how many of you knew we had a strategic cheese reserve? Raise your hand if you knew that. A few people do, okay. We have a strategic gold reserve. We hold about 5% of the world's gold in physical gold, in addition to those gold certificates. So make sure that this is not some out-of-the-box, unique reserve, that it can be part and parcel of other commodities that we believe are important for the United States to have as part of our portfolio that is fully diversified, whether it's land in the form of Bureau of Land Management, land, national parks, national forests, and so forth, or whether it's commodities like gold.
でも、イフィリアムとかソラナとかになると中央集権になってくるわけよね、会社で。だからそれってコモディティじゃなくなるんだよね。誰のビットコイン、誰が持ってるビットコインも何も変わんないっていうのはコモディティだけども、誰かが持ってるね、ソラナとかっていうのは、ね、最初のファウンダーが持ってるソラナとかさ、それちょっと違うわけよね。うん。だからちょっと違う。コモディティとセキュリティとトークン。という話で、そのね、明確化しようってことも言ってるわけね。だから、クリプトザーの、デイビッド・サックスも言ってたけども、ビットコインとイフィリアムはコモディティと言われていて、一応法案上ね、今のところは。で、ソラナとかはセキュリティでね。で、トークンはトークンで、特にトークン自体の価値はないという話。ただ、株との違いもトークンもあって、トークンと株の違いは、株は、 それで株式を発行して資金を得て、それを会社のね、何かに使えるようになるのが株の意味であって、トークンっていうのは、おそらくフィーとかね、手数料とか、そういうとこに使えるようなあれみたいな。で、マーケットでアップダウンもあってって話らしいよ。そういうのをちょろっと聞いたけどね。だからそういう法案規制をしていかないといけないと話。ということで、州レベルでね、先行作業しているウィスコンシン委員がビットコインを戦略的準備金にね、加える動きを今見せていて、州はね、イノベーター、つまり日本で言うと東京都がね、スタートアップみたいな感じよ。まず国の前には都知事とか県でやれるみたいなね、小さいからチームが。で、インパクトもね、国ほどでかくないから、まずは小さいところのチームでやっていこうみたいな感じで、州でやってるのがインキュベーター。で、国より先にね、実践的に取り組みが可能されていて、それをね、今やってるっていうのをルミス議員が見てると。で、ビットコインの本質とほどの戦略なんだけども、ビットコインというのはデイトレードの、ね、資産ではなくて20年間保有して放置するというのが戦略の本質。つまり、資産保有のね、意味があって、お金のね、意味はないよ。何かを買うためにビットコインを使うとか、そういう意味ではないよね。それと一緒、不動産もそうでしょ。不動産を使ってさ、ね、マクドナルドとかセブンイレブンでおにぎり買わないでしょ。不動産のね、0.0001 不動産分で、セブンイレブンでおにぎり買えますとかないじゃん。それと一緒、ビットコインの 0.000 ビットコインで、セブンイレブンでポカリセット買いますとか、そういう話じゃないんだよね。不動産でお金を置いとくところでしょ。パークしとくところ。ね。キープしとくところ。キープして、かつお金を失わないようにっていうので、まあ、すべての不動産がそうではないけど、ゴールドなんてまさにそうじゃん。お金をね、なくならないように、増やすためのところでしょ。ビットコインもそれなんだよね。ということで、ビットコイン特性は、非中央集権、希少性、分割可能性として、長期保有に最適なわけ。で、政治からのね、圧迫も受けないし、トラストレスだし、ね、完全ディセントラライズ。ということで、政治活動や献金に積極的にね、ビットコインコミュニティが参加するようになって、トランプも政治と関わってビットコインをつなげたという話。ということで、今後は安定した規制法律の枠組みを設けることで、アメリカが再び暗号資産の中心になる土台を築いていく。今、重大な、局面を迎えていて、今がね、キャンプだよ、キャンプ。プロ野球のキャンプの時と一緒よ。てか、まあ、冬だよね、冬でもないけどもさ。筋トレはね、夏ボディは夏に作られるんじゃなくて冬に作られるのと一緒。ね。ビットコインのオールタイムハイ、トゥーザムーンっていうのは今作られてるわけね、土台。ということで、米ドルの基軸通貨としての地位維持においてもビットコインはね、補完的な戦略的資産として位置づける可能性が高く、ビットコインなしにはアメリカは世界最強にならないということを見れば、ビットコイン持っとけばアメリカと一緒にね、一緒に相乗効果で強くなれるということで。
A lot of credit to Hester Peirce at the SEC for involving herself in setting these new policy goals. We want to help her make sure that there's a regulatory framework in statute that does help sort out what is a commodity and what is a security. Now, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and I have proposed using the Howey test, which has been interpreted by the federal courts of appeals dozens and dozens of times. So there's a lot of case law that gives us a roadmap on how to apply the Howey test to what's a security and what is a commodity. And under that test, yes, most digital assets are probably commodities. You don't have that kind of a relationship between the issuer and the owner of the underlying asset that creates an expectation of a profit or other incidents of ownership. There is not the creation of an investment contract, but we want to make sure those things are embodied in the law. What Senator Gillibrand and I have proposed is something called ancillary assets, for lack of a better term, that would tend to institutionalize embed in statute, the Howey test.
When we see the administration come in, we see the regulation treatment of this industry change. it feels like that is us putting a flag in the ground and saying anyone in the world that would like to participate in the United States economy, in the U.S. capital markets, and operate in this industry, we're kind of open for business. That is the exact opposite of what we saw for years. And we saw people run all around the world.
Yep.
It does feel like we are a little behind because there are places like the Dubais, the Singapores. They have created sandboxes of testing and innovation. They have created no tax zones. They have, really gone out and said, we want to incentivize this industry to come here. What do you think the United States should be doing on that front to maybe play catch up and get these people coming back to the United States and wanting to build these businesses and these technologies here?
President Trump has articulated that as a goal for our country. He wants Bitcoin mining in the U.S. He wants to onshore people who chose to organize a digital asset business overseas because our regulatory framework was hostile. He wants to make this an environment where this industry can thrive. He did an executive order basically overturning Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 at the SEC. He set up a working group within the executive branch to prioritize digital assets. David Sachs is they're calling him sort of the crypto czar. He's coordinating with appointed officials who understand this asset class. And so you've got a Treasury Secretary who understands it. You've got folks at the SEC, the CFTC, the OCC, the alphabet soup of financial service regulatory entities who understand these issues and are taking a more positive, business-friendly approach. And thank God, it's just wonderful. It's a breath of fresh air. So those of us who are in Congress, which is they are all, as between the tortoise and the hare, they're the hare. We're the tortoise. And so as we move more slowly, because lawmaking is that way, it's hard, it's time-consuming, it's designed not to allow for knee-jerk advancements in policy change. We're the ones who are coming slow, but we've been planning. You all have seen the Lummis-Gillibrand Financial Innovation Act for 3 years. It's been out there for 3 years. The Bitcoin Act was filed last September in the last Congress so people could see how it works and we could get some good ideas about how to make it better. We're trying to be transparent so we can get good feedback. We don't want people saying, well, you just blindsided me. I need more time on this. This is all going to be very transparent. And so once again, take pieces of legislation that exist. You can look them up on the websites. You can see summaries of them, and you can help your legislators understand when you think they're good or not. And if you think there are aspects of this legislation that need improvement, call my office. Chris Land is here, and Connor Brown is here. They're back in the corner. And we're happy to help you make improvements.
One of the things I heard many times from politicians over the years was we can't embrace Bitcoin because the people who own Bitcoin will benefit from that. It seems like that changed, though, when all of a sudden the politicians realized that the people who owned Bitcoin may be willing to part with some of their hard-earned money and provide it to their campaigns.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden there seems to be a very simpatico relationship between politicians and the Bitcoin community. Talk a little bit about just the impact of what really I think maybe is a broader technology story, but definitely showed in the Bitcoin industry where people just didn't participate in politics. They just said, hey, that's not my thing. I want to build my company. I want to focus on what I'm doing. I continue to say it feels like the political apparatus kind of came for them. And so they said, we can either ignore it and continue to get taken advantage of, or we can participate. And that participation had a profound impact in this last election cycle and seems to have really changed a lot of politicians' minds about what they wanted to do in terms of interfacing with the Bitcoin community.
I think you absolutely nailed it. I think that's what happened. You know, Bitcoiners know that this is freedom money, that it's a commodity, that you don't need a regulatory framework, and that you want to have your individual wallets. It's your property. It's none of the government's business, and leave us alone. I totally get that. I feel that way too. The government didn't feel that way 4 years ago. They want to tax Bitcoin miners when it's coming out of the computer and when you sell it, double taxation. They wanted to impose requirements that Bitcoin miners report the energy that they were consuming in order to mine Bitcoin, even though they would never do that to a cloud computing center that's owned by a major company. Everywhere you looked in the regulatory framework, it was hostile. And the hostility was pointed at not just Bitcoin, but other digital assets, Ethereum, Cardano, Solana, all the stuff. But Bitcoin was caught up in that. And so if you have companies that are custodying multiple assets or lending, using some of these assets as collateral or whatever, Bitcoin was caught up in it. And the fact that this community started engaging with politicians, and it is a pathetic statement that politicians respond to campaign contributions, and pathetic or not, it's true. And so the fact that this community engaged in the political process in the last election got people's attention.
What else can everyone in this room do in terms of continuing to push this forward? You know, I feel like there's a couple of politicians that are fighting the Bitcoin fight, and I can only imagine the bewildered looks that you have from your colleagues when you start talking about a strategic reserve or you start talking about some of these things. Money is one component. It also feels like there have been moments in time over the last 4 or 5 years where the community has rallied together, and you know, there's a bill that's going to get passed and they really get loud online. And it seems like that also has an impact. Are there certain things that you can kind of share with everyone as to how they help you do your job better?
Well, certainly your engagement on social media helps a lot. Your engagement with politicians help a lot. Sometimes as I mentioned, we're an echo chamber. So we think that just because we're all for a Bitcoin strategic reserve, that everybody is. And so it was kind of a setback for me when my beloved chairman of the banking committee, Tim Scott, gently said, we're starting with stablecoins. We're going to market structure. And we might need to put a pin for a little while in a Bitcoin strategic reserve because we're not there yet. In other words, Senator Scott is talking with our Senate colleagues who don't want to tell me that they're not ready to vote for a Bitcoin strategic reserve, but they will tell him that they're not ready. And so it was hard for me to hear that my colleagues, even on my side of the aisle, are not ready. But it was one of the most helpful conversations that he could have had with me. So we're now identifying offices on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, that we can go sit down and have the conversation with from start to finish. And so that takes time. So I do think we'll probably see some states, certainly the UAE, Wisconsin is already invested in Bitcoin. We have some good modeling out there that people can look at about what a strategic reserve would do over time. People are always worried about the volatility because they're looking at this on the short term. You know, we were celebrating $100,000 Bitcoin over New Year's, and now it's down around 81,000. There's short-term volatility. We need to acknowledge that and remind people that this is a store of value. This is not a day trading asset. So keep reminding people, this is a buy and hold thing, that there's a reason the term HODL exists. And that's what the point is of a Bitcoin reserve. It's buy and hold it for 20 years. Don't touch it for 20 years. And then it will be in a position to make a huge financial difference. In the meantime, it'll be growing in value. And it, alongside with some of our other strategic reserves, will help kind of undergird the US dollar as the world reserve currency, or at least validate the fact that we have a diversified asset allocation here in the United States. And it includes gold, and it includes digital gold.
I pray every day that you're going to be successful. You're doing a great job. Please keep it up, everyone. Senator Cynthia Lummis.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming. Thank you.
しかないという状態、GAFAM よりも強くなるということで、今回役立った意見があったらぜひコメント欄でシェア、グッドボタン、スマッチを、ゴリにプロテイン代のお賽銭もよろしく。バイバイ。